To complete your next assignment, you need to set up a multi-page document. So to do that, we're going to create a new document and we're going to choose inches because who knows how to measure in picas for real. I want this not to be an 8.5 by 11 sheet. I want it to be slightly customized, so I'm going 8 by 10. For the case of this example, I want to perfect bind my book. I want 40 pages, and when I have this primary facing page or this facing page selected, what it's saying is that I'm making spreads and not sheets. I do not want this primary text frame clicked in. The reason for that is it automatically puts a text box into and onto every page, which could sound like a great idea if you're just writing a standard book without any design elements or very few design elements, but in this case we want to do a shorter form book, so we're really going to be customizing the layout and it just becomes problematic. For the time being, I'm good with a 1-column grid. And let's talk about the margin setup real quick. So I love a generous margin. It's a stylistic choice, but I feel like white space is elegant and it gives the viewer time to absorb everything that you're sharing. So I wanted an inch at the top and the bottom, and I'm just choosing 3/4 of an inch on the outside because I love a good uneven margin. I think if it's just a simple box all the way around, it gets a little dull. Now my inside margin seems really, really big, and let's talk about the reason for that. If you've got a 40-page book and you're perfect binding it, remember, perfect binding is when you glue the edges up and then you wrap it in a cover. Now, when you open up that perfect bound book, you typically do not get a lay flat experience. There's about 1/4 of an inch, give or take, that is consumed just in that process of folding the page over. And so I want to make sure that you don't lose information in that page, whether it be text or important part of the image, because of the margin. So I'm making that margin generous to make sure that all the information that I want you to see is well within the borders of the page and really easy to grab a hold of. You can make this a little bit less if you want to. We could drop it down to like 1 1/4, but when it comes to a larger book that's being perfect bound, I wouldn't run the risk unless you know that you're getting a test print and can really test that out. For the bleed, this is something that you would talk to your printer about in advance and make sure that you are meeting their qualifications. Industry standard for a document this size is typically about 1/8 of an inch, which is 0.125, and so you want to make sure you have that set up so that when you're putting in your graphic elements, a color background on a page, or images that you want to bleed off the side of the page, that you're doing it correctly from the start and that you won't have to go back retroactively and adjust every single color or page layout that has an image or background color or graphic element, because that, if you think about a 40-page document, it could be really time consuming. Okay, so we're all good here in the setup. I'm going to go ahead and hit create, and this is what the page looks like. If I zoom out, again, command and the dash or hyphen sign, you can see that the document is set up in spreads and not pages. Zoom back in, and we're going to look at the pages over here. Now, if you're not seeing this tool in the same way on your screen, you want to make sure that you've gone to Window, Workspace, and Advanced. And even then, I've added a few things that are useful, that I find useful, that you may want to just go ahead and add in manually into your toolbar so that you can work quickly and efficiently. So just take a screenshot of that and you can go back in and add the different elements that you're missing through the windows here, and you would just open something and then you could drag and drop it into this bar if it wasn't already there. Okay, so that's the basics on how you set up a multi-page file. Now, again, we had to know how many pages approximately, so that we knew how we were going to have it bound, and we needed an approximate page count, although you certainly can add pages in layout as needed. But the number of pages and the way that it determines the way that it's found, and the way that it's found really determines the way that you need to set up your margins. If you were doing saddle stitch, let's start a new document. So if I'm going to create a new document for saddle stitch, and let's say for that I just want to have 16 pages, which again, divisible by 4, facing pages. We're going to start at page 1, that's fine. In this case, 16-page saddle stitch would lay flat everywhere. So I'm going to drop this inside margin back down to something that is more similar to the outside margin. I'm going to keep the bleed the same because in either case, the document's going to be trimmed as part of the finishing process, and I don't want them to trim so much of the image off that I'm left with an odd white border where I don't want there to be one. So we're going to create that document here, and on the onset it looks pretty similar. You can see all the different spreads, but this inside margin is different, and the instructions will be different to the printer because this would be saddle stitched. So really this is a matter of knowing what you're going to do, what you're producing, the format, like how long it's going to be, and the way that you're going to have it bound together. And you need to have those things decided at the start. You could also decide if you were doing like a spiral bind, you'd want to apply the same kind of principles that you would for a perfect bind, because that spiral has to cut into that inside margin, and so you lose a significant amount of space around those holes and the actual spirals themselves. So you want to make sure that you're staying clear of that in your design layout. So those are some things to consider as you're setting up your page document. In our next video, we're going to get into setting up master pages so that you can start to flow in your copy and set up a good layout with variety.